What is up, podheads? Episode 147 of the Podio Slate podcast. Happy New Year. We're into the new year, 2023. The year shows come back. Oh, wait, they've already been going. I know Nate had the soft opening and all that.
Grand opening.
Oh, yeah, grand opening is back this year, this spring, and shit. We're here for it. But hey, we're here doing another episode of the Podio Slate podcast, talking to another cool individual in the music industry about a record that we all love. But I'm joined by Anthony and Nate. How you guys doing?
Great, man. We're here for the grand opening, and it couldn't be more aligned with a 20th anniversary of one of our favorite records. What record are we talking about, Twan?
The Artist in the Ambulance, man. Thrice. 20 years of Thrice this year in 2023. It's a record that we all bonded with in the moment, and I know we'd heard of Thrice before this, but we were not into Illusion of Safety like when it came out in 2002. So this was largely our exposure. And I remember driving around, Nate, you had your license early. Tone, you had your license early. Driving around, listening to this album.
Yep.
It was huge because it came out the summer of 2003, right?
Yeah, and we saw them on tour for this in Maine with The Used and My Chem and
Story of the Year.
Yeah, just a
in 2003, April 2003. April 2003.
And just an amazing record that we've all spent a shit ton of time with. Still holds up today. We've listened to it a bunch in preparation for this conversation, and I even had it on in the car with my wife the other night and was pointing out things to her that, I mean, she's not a Thrice fan, but was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, not her scene at all, but she's into it because of how good these guys are. It doesn't shock me. Like, it's really cool to have been able to deep dive this record.
Yeah, when you layer in like personal connection along with obviously just great artistry, it's like kind of undeniable, fan or not. Like, you're like, oh, dude, like this. There's something special here, and I think Brian really highlighted that in depth in this interview for obvious reasons. But beyond that, very much so exceeded, like you said, Twan, our expectations on where is this going to go, how much is he going to give us, and it's just like hot take after hot take.
Yeah, and we if you've listened to us, like we'll chat about albums that we love, just the three of us, and we'll love it. We'll have a great time. With this one, we thought about who could join us, and obviously a band member would be great. Obviously, they've stuck together all these years, but then we were thinking Brian McTernan, legendary producer, singer of Be Well currently, is someone that we've always admired. He's been on our wish list for this podcast for many years. We've been doing this for many years, which is crazy. And we thought to hit him up. I mean, he's done records for the movie Life. He's done records for New End Original. He's done records for Fireworks, Reach the Sky, Bane, Turnstile, Circa Survive, With Honor, bands that we've loved for almost as long as this album has been out. So we're like, that's our guy. This is the album. If we're going to have Brian on, this is the album. So we hit him up, and we deep dove Artist in the Ambulance, guys, and it was awesome. You guys are going to hear it soon. Any comments before we get into this?
I mean, one of my favorite records ever, one of my favorite bands ever, and I'm so stoked that we were able to talk to him about their kind of record that put them really on the map. I mean, obviously Illusion of Safety was big, but this one was the one that made people turn and say, they're doing stuff that we want to do too. Let's try to be like them.
A lot of copycats came out of this, out of that era, but like this sound for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything you said, but also just the first person account on before, during, and after is untouchable. I mean, like, we were obsessed with Behind the Music back in the day on VH1, but this is like elevated because it's our personal questions. It's not like de facto, like I'm a fan, like watching this, but in between commercials, like we get to like specifically zero in on what we want to know. And he obliged like 100%. So this is a great interview.
And you don't have to listen to a Burger King commercial in the middle of this. So good for you guys.
But yeah, 20 years, Artist in the Ambulance with the guy that produced the damn album, Brian McTernan. We're going to get right into it right now. Thanks for listening. All right, we are here with the one, the only Brian McTernan. Brian, thank you for coming on the podcast. This is awesome.
Yeah, man, I'm psyched. Thanks for having me. This is great.
So we have a wish list on this podcast when we started like 3 years ago. And guess what? You were on it.
Oh, wow.
But it wasn't until, I don't know, whenever we hit you up online, like 3 weeks ago, that we were like, all right, now's the time. Because we could have done like the deep dive of you and Battery and all that, which you've done on podcasts, I think a million times.
Yeah.
Or we could do the album route of albums you produced. But then it's like, which one do we pick? You know?
That actually might be a 6-hour podcast, right?
We'll have you back. We'll do it again.
Yeah, we'll do it again. So yeah, like when we saw Artist in the Ambulance was turning 20 this year in 2023, we were like, now's the time. We got to get him on, because we would have done this episode without you. You know what I mean? We love this record so much. We would have deep dove it.
Me too. Well, I'm psyched that we're doing this, because I'm actually flying out to LA on Thursday to see the guys play. Yeah, Illusion of Safety. So I'm really excited.
Oh, at House of Blues in Anaheim?
Yep.
I have it in my calendar. I'm like, I should go to this. I should go to this. Especially with this, I should definitely go to this.
You should go to that. Yeah.
I should now. I'm probably going to go to this. Yeah.
It's gonna be great. I'm psyched. I'm so psyched.
So it's a record that we love. We bonded over it back when we were 17, whenever it was. Love it, love it, love it. So we definitely want to deep dive that. But what's going on with you? I know, like, you just wrapped up with Be Well on that Boy Sets Fire tour. You get some GB dates, I think, in Europe. Yep. And then you're headlining some stuff, right?
Yeah, we have some GB dates here in the US, actually, Philly and Baltimore. And then we're headlining in Europe in March, which is going to be fucking great. Because we just wrapped up this Hot Water Music Boy Sets Fire tour, which was amazing. But it was like the biggest shows I've ever been to in my life. And it was like massive stages and like huge barriers and all this stuff. And it was a treat. But it's like, I think that what we do, it is more special in like a more intimate environment. So we're going to play like clubs with no barriers, and it'll be great. I mean, the Hot Water Boy Sets thing was amazing. So I'm not to sound negative about, I'm not negative about that at all. It was just, it will be nice to do something a little bit different.
Nice. Yeah. It's always fun to get the perspective of somebody who's done both things. So like you're playing shows and also produced some albums that we love too, as we were just talking about. So exciting to see you guys do your thing. I know we talked about that Be Well EP earlier this year, summer maybe? Or was that last year?
It came out this summer. So
yeah, we're living in the future here.
Yeah.
But yeah, we because I saw you down at Sticks and Stones Fest in Worcester, which was awesome.
Yes.
And then the EP was out at that point, and
I think it just came out right before that tour started.
Yeah, and I'm actually, our listeners can't see it, but I am that guy. I'm wearing a Be Well t-shirt right now.
Oh shit, I like that.
Is this
Love
like
that.
You're not supposed to do this, right?
I think it's cool, man.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's cool. I'll give you shit for it later.
Right.
That's awesome.
Well, the funny thing is that we did that Newfound Glory tour. That was honestly like, outside of maybe Battery playing a couple festivals, I had never played shows with a barrier in my life, really. That definitely took some getting used to.
So, Brian, you said you're flying out to Anaheim, the show that I have in my calendar. We do like a little like shared calendar with us three here. Like, oh, dude, I really want to check out this gig. So you're going to fly out, see the guys Thrice. They're going to play The Illusion of Safety in its entirety Thursday through Sunday, I believe. They kept adding dates when they announced these shows. And it's cool. You're tight with those guys. How did that relationship start prior to producing that album?
You know what's funny about Thrice is that they were actually one of the first bands I ever recorded that I didn't have like a direct connection with before. Their manager called me and said, "Oh, I manage this band," and he sent me the first record, and I thought it was super cool. But at that point in time, I mean, I was recording a ton of bands, but it was all like, I record this band and then their friends come in and the Thrice was, I didn't know the guys at all. They didn't know any of the bands that I had ever worked with. There was like my bands had never played with them. So they were really one of the first bands that was like, I didn't have a connection with, but I loved the music when I heard it. And they flew at the time. My studio was in Beltsville, Maryland, and they flew in. And I remember they were like such music nerds. Like Eddie had like Bass Player magazine and Tepe's reading like Guitar World. They were just so like serious about their craft. It was pretty funny.
So how do you get the call to work with them? Like how did that go down?
I don't remember I mean, I think that I just got a phone call from their manager, this guy Nick Bogardus at the time, and those guys were like, they were like doing I think they were getting into doing the like odd time signatures and heavier stuff and the more linear arrangements of some other, like Converge and Caven and some other bands I had worked with, and they just reached out, and then it wasn't at all what I expected it to be when I heard it. I mean, it was like, oh wow, this is like not very East Coast sounding, like the first record in particular. But I loved it. Was super melodic and it was different. And Dustin always wrote amazing lyrics. And then when the dudes got there, I mean, it's interesting because, as I said, they're one of the bands I had never first bands I ever recorded I had no connection with, but like we're so connected now. I mean, over 20 years later, we talk all the time, and they're friends with so many of the other bands that I've worked with. It's like a really great relationship.
Because I can't remember what label because it was Identity Crisis was that first album. So you'd never heard them up until like you got that call?
Until they sent me Identity Crisis, I never heard them. And it's a pretty funny story actually with Illusion of Safety, because I almost didn't do the record because I loved Identity Crisis, and we had spoken, and I knew they wanted it to be heavier. But then the initial batch of demos they sent me had, I don't know whether it was like just the demos or the way Dustin was screaming, but there was really no melodic stuff at all. And I was like, wait, this is not, this isn't.
Who is this? Yeah.
Who is this? And so I mean, I guess this is a testament to a good manager, but I was on visiting my wife's father was living in Hong Kong, and we were in Hong Kong. And I'm listening to these demos, and I just kind of had this freak out, and I sent this email like, hey guys, maybe I'm not the right guy.
Wow.
And their manager wrote me back like, no, you're the right guy. Like, we all think there needs to be more melodic stuff. This is just I mean, I can't remember the exact things, but then it was like, I'm so glad. I mean, like, had he been like, all right, cool, we'll do it with someone else, like my life would be real different.
Right. Yeah. No, it worked out, obviously. And we got the Illusion of Safety, which is great. And then we got the Artist in the Ambulance too, which is all time for us. So you produce that comes out, they're making waves, they get signed to Island. Did you think that maybe they'd bring you along to do the next record, the major label, or did the label want somebody else? How did that come about?
No, I think that it was pretty early on. Like I think that I stayed very in contact with the bands. And then, I mean, when that record came out, it was like people were fired up. It was just like different, and kids loved it. And it was super clear that it could be something, next level. And then even I think that some of the labels, I think that there had been a lot of like, there were a lot of underground bands that were signing, and then the records were not coming out exactly like what people had hoped they were. So I think there was this wave like with Thrice and Thursday where the labels were kind of like, you know what, let's just like keep these guys with the people that were making this exciting music. And I remember the guy that they ended up signing with, Rob Stevenson. We would talk almost every day. I mean, he was super. It felt like he felt like I was an important part of the team, and I think the band did. And I mean, the crazy thing looking back now is that we were so young. I mean, I was like 25 or 26 when I produced The Artist in the Ambulance.
Wow,
just like
crazy. Remember
crazy.
when we were 26, Tone?
We were living together actually.
We weren't producing records.
We weren't producing all-time records that are still being talked about 20 years later. You're right.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing that was the illusion of safety. I mean, I think what's so cool is it just kind of changed the landscape of music in a lot of ways. Like it was not from a like sales point of view, was it this like whatever? I mean, I think the record did well, but I mean, I think record bands just started wanting to sound different after that record. Like it was, and I don't mean that like patting myself on the back. It's patting the band on the back and their vision. Right.
If you think of that era, it wouldn't be out of pocket for like a Bane kid to like Thrice, but also like a drive-through kid.
Right.
It had, so it was like perfect. It was perfect. And then like I don't even know if there's a Thrice kid, but a Thrice kid obviously likes it. So they're pulling from everything. You get the breakdown and To Awake and Avenge the Dead that can bring out those kids. And
and well, it's also very intellectual music. I mean, it's like everything about it makes you think. The lyrics, the playing, the songwriting, like it's just like there's a lot of bands that have done melodic music with heavy breakdowns, but Thrice like weaved them together in a way that I don't think a lot of bands had, and they have this just depth to what they do that you just don't come across very often.
That's a good point. That actually led right into my next question, is that kind of like ethos that you kind of all shared collectively, the band and yourself. Like Anthony says it quite often that the producer in a lot of ways is like the fifth member of the band. So were you, after the illusion of safety, kind of always on the pulse with what they were doing in between, whether they be touring or writing sessions prior to Artists in the Ambulance?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, we really got along. There was like, we had like great synergy. I think I did with the band. And then I was also, I feel like, not older than Riley, but older than some of the other guys. And like, I think like through them coming to the East Coast and working with me, they became really good friends with like the Caven guys and the Hot Water guys and the Movie Life guys and all these different bands that I was, and started touring with those bands. And they were just, I mean, honestly, at that time in my life, all of the bands I was working with were like my family. They'd all stay with me on tour. I'd talk to them almost every day. And I mean, it was the fun thing about like, before you have like kids and responsibilities like that, you can, I went to every show within a 3 or 4 hour radius. And it was just that was a very, a really special time for all of those bands and myself in the studio and everything. But yeah, so to answer your question, I stayed in contact with them a lot. And then when it became clear that I was going to do the Artists in the Ambulance, when they started writing, even I spent a lot of time out there with them, like bouncing ideas off of them, putting arrangements together. And I think before we ever recorded anything on the Artists in the Ambulance, I spent almost 4 or 5 weeks in Southern California with the guys, just just hanging out and listening to them write and helping them kind of put ideas together.
That we have that question kind of coming up, but you just answered it. So you were around for the writing of it too. It wasn't just they came to you with a bunch of songs, we're ready to go, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of it, I mean, I can't remember why that was, because it wasn't like I wrote those songs. They wrote those songs and I was there helping kind of like guide things and saying, oh, let's try this like this, or, they were, I think some of it came down to those records were not that far apart. And then the band toured so much that it was like, okay, let's get right. Let's be kind of doing the pre-production on this stuff as it's written. And thank God we did, because then again, it was like, we went to record the Artists in the Ambulance and then they went like directly back on tour. Like we had there was no extra time anywhere. It was like, we had to finish recording the first single for the Artists in the Ambulance and get it like mixed and mastered before we had ever finished recording the rest of the record.
Wow.
Like, it was just a crazy, it was a crazy time.
Major label, right? It has to be a little push from that. There's a time frame. Like, this needs to be out now because we, it's getting ready going into the spring, summer. when they're going to tour on it. Like, yeah, that makes
Exactly.
sense.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, it's got to come out, in the summer, because once you get into the fall, it's all the Metallicas of the world putting, whatever. So, but it was cool. And the guys handled the pressure well. And the label, I mean, I feel like the label was pretty hands off. Like, you hear the horror stories, but
Totally.
this was not that. They were pretty supportive of the whole thing. And I mean, it helps when the songs are good, because there's not a lot to freak out about. And those guys, I don't know if they know how to write a bad song.
No, they don't. You're right.
It's interesting, Brian. The producer role has so much mystique, because you're the Rick Rubins of the world that literally aren't even rumored, aren't even in the studio. They're just calling in. How are things going? Everything good?
Right.
All right.
We've heard that story.
We've
before.
heard that. And then you have, like Nate said, producers that are like the fifth member that, some of them write the damn songs, you know what I mean, when it comes down to it. So what's your approach? I'm so curious, because your catalog is like, there's a special sauce. There's some special sauce.
I'm definitely not a Rick Rubin type where I'm just calling in. Now, I will say, you can be that type of person and still be the fifth member of the band, still be
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't think there's like a rule book on like, in what way you're involved to, kind of fall into that fifth. I mean, the funny thing for me is I'm like the fifth member of a lot of bands I'm not even producing records for, only because I think that I'm pretty like straight with people about what I think. And I think bands are often surrounded by a lot of people that early on, just tell them whatever they want to hear to keep them happy. And then just when things don't go well, flip the switch and just tell them everything is bad and it's all their fault. So I think that having someone that's gonna, it's always pleasant to hear, is gonna tell you straight up what they think is important. And so, I mean, I have bands that I haven't made records for in a long time, but they still send me the demos, and we still, have pretty, like, deep conversations about my thoughts on the stuff.
It's a relation. It sounds like it's a relationship based.
I mean, for me, my life is the bands I've worked with. I mean, to be honest, like I just been fortunate in I feel like the most impressive thing about my discography is how many incredible people are involved in that, not, the bands and the sales and the whatever. It's just like, I feel most fortunate that I've made friends that like, would do anything for me just through my job, which is, I don't think that a lot of people can say that.
That's the best thing we could have heard, because the whole Rick Rubin thing, it's allegedly, right? We're not like throwing anyone under the bus here, but there's also like the Brendan O'Briens of the world that actually do play on the records, like we're alluding to. So you're kind of in the middle, maybe not playing on the records per se, but there's a relationship where
I play on records, and I sometimes write stuff, and sometimes I just get out of the way. You know what I mean? And I also have a lot of the most important things that happen with a record. And this is my point with the Rick Rubin thing, is a lot of the most important stuff that happens with the record happens before the record gets made even. So at any given time, I might have 3 or 4 people that I'm working on like songs with or ideas with or whatever. And sometimes it's as simple as like, dude, I just sent you this voice memo of this whatever, and I don't need to be in the room with them to go, dude, that fucking rules, run with that. Which is my picture of maybe what Rick Rubin is doing. The other thing about Rick Rubin is Rick Rubin assembles a cast of the absolute best people that have ever done any given thing.
No shit.
And he supervises them and trusts them, and he gets involved when it's time to get involved. And honestly, that isn't for every band. And I think that I'm not for every band. And one of the things that I always like, you have like periods where all these different producers are like the hot producer and everybody goes to them. And which is kind of a shame, because I think chemistry between a band and a producer is like everything. And so there have been plenty of projects that I have been up for that it's probably good that I didn't get. And there are projects that I have ended up saying, even if it's a project that I felt like was something I would love to professionally be involved with, but like the chemistry between us just didn't feel right and I didn't feel like I would excel, that I've said no to. You know, it isn't just like, oh, this person's doing great and they're killing it and, you know, everything they touch is gold and just send everybody to them. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the producer either. And that's why there's sometimes a short shelf life. You know, throughout my career, there have been a lot of hot new people that fade out, you know?
Well, and we're off on a tangent because we will get back to Artists in the Ambulance, but one last thing that I kind of wanted to throw out there, it takes somebody to do it for as long as you have, takes somebody that knows when to back off and when to jump in. So being able to do that must have been something you've worked on throughout this, 20 some odd years.
It's a combination of like, yeah, experience and honestly having enough confidence to know that like sometimes the job is getting out of the way and sometimes the job is like completely standing in front of the train and like saying what needs to be said and doing what needs to be done, even if it ends up hurting people's feelings, and kind of finding the balance between those and trusting yourself to like know that like you can be an important part of a record without having to have your handprints all over it. And sometimes you need to jump in and play the guitar, write the lyrics, or do what needs to be done to get the thing where it needs to go. I think sometimes one of the things that I got to work with this like old school producer guy, this guy Mike Barbiero, a bunch of times. He's like my hero. He did like mixed Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction, but also mixed the Civ record.
Wow, that's a range.
He's worked with like Elton John and like Metallica and all of these bands. And he said to me, and it was pretty early in my career, and it was like really important to hear. It's like, this isn't about you. This is about them. And he said to me, you know, you're because he was mixing a record for me. And the band was like driving him crazy. And at that time in my life, I probably would have told them to fuck off and go home. and he was super, super like patient with them and look way more so than I would have been at the time. And we went to have lunch and I was like, dude, you want me to like tell these guys to get out of here? And he said to me, no, man, this is their record. You're going to do this 100 more times in your life. And if everything goes right for them, they're only going to do it 2 or 3 more times. So like if they want to try something stupid, you just let them try it. And if you think that it's going to hurt the song, that's when you fight. Right. But like kind of always remembering that it really isn't about me is like one of the reasons that I have had a long career, because I think when you go in there and you make it all about you, that's when every record starts to sound the same. And that's when artists don't flourish and they, don't come back. You know what I mean? Like it's, it's interesting.
Yeah. So that leads me back to Artists in the Ambulance. You work with them on Thrice on The Illusion of Safety. You're hanging around while they're writing The Artists in the Ambulance. There are some elements of The Illusion of Safety, but they clearly are maturing, doing some different things, trying out some different time signatures, but still keeping their heaviness too. What was it like to kind of hear them mature? And was there anything in there that you were like, this is amazing, I can't believe you guys are going there, for you in the moment?
I mean, kind of all of it was, I felt that way. Like, I just felt
I love that answer.
They were just interested in different aspects of musicality and songwriting than other bands that I had worked with. And it was like, it was exciting to be around that. And it's a funny thing because another weird part of being a producer is like, you have to love the artist. You have to be in awe of the artist, but you also have to still find a way to see beyond what they even think is possible. So it's like, how do you be around with these guys that are like so clearly like just bursting at the seams with creativity, and like wrap your arms around it, keep it focused, keep it productive, and keep pushing them beyond what they think they're capable of. That's the thing. And I feel like we did a pretty good job of that, especially considering we really had no fucking idea what we were doing.
Well, this might be an interesting question. Like, did you feel like maybe you met your match with Thrice, or like you were outmatched?
No,
Because like this was I mean, this is a technical album. Time signatures all over the place. Like,
not at all. I mean, I felt like we were. I felt like it was good because I felt like the things that they needed from a producer, I was like perfect for at the time. And also,
awesome. Yeah,
those guys are like, saying they're introverted would be completely wrong, but they're quiet, they're shy guys, they're into what they're into, and they're not like big, bold, aggressive personalities. So I think that had you thrown them into the studio with some like LA big time dude who was like couldn't like really like nurture their eccentricities, they wouldn't have come out. I don't think they would have come out of their shell in the way that they did.
Yeah, we can see that. It kind of reminds me of the grunge scene, like all those guys, Kurt Cobain, Eddie Vedder, Chris Cornell, they're all kind of like somewhat quiet people, but the music obviously is polar opposite to that. So you kind of understand where you're coming from there. One thing I wanted to circle back to, you were saying the band is kind of bursting at the seams. There's just so much creativity, so much energy, and you're trying to, in a way, de facto hone it in to a degree. Is a lot of that have to do with there's so much, especially this band Thrice, there's so much range, so many different directions that you're almost like, this is good, let's kind of focus on this, that way the record is a little bit more cohesive? Or is it, how does that work?
I mean, I don't know that we ever were like, oh, I mean, it's just a song by song thing. I mean, some of it, and then the other thing was, I mean, like sometimes it was suggesting a different approach to an already established idea, like the song Stare at the Sun. I think Eddie, when he wrote that bass, was imagining that would be like a converged type of song, like
really,
all whatever.
I gotta listen back to that.
And it was like, oh, why don't we just try that riff with like a straightforward drum beat? You know what I mean? It's like I don't remember even that was whose idea that was, but it's like that was kind of the nature of the process. And then it was interesting because on that record, the guys, I think they were already like, I think that like, to me, it's such an artistic record, but I think by the time we wrapped it up, they were ready to get weird. You know what I mean? They were like, I think maybe for them, that record might have been a little straight laced.
Yeah. Well, and then they do that later on, right? I mean, Visu has some weird stuff in it, which I love. And then the EPs,
it just gets weirder and weirder from there, right?
And then they go bluesy with Beggars. Yeah, no, we could talk Thrice all night. Oh wait, we're gonna, but I fucking love them, and it's because you're right, they're bursting with creativity, and they have so many different, I guess, sounds to show you that they can pull off. So this one was the first one that got us into them, and it's because of songs like Silhouette and Paper Tigers and the heaviness of it, but also the intricacies that you could hear. Every time you put it on, you found something new. And I mean, I listened to it last week again, and then Saturday again, and I'm like, oh yeah, that part's amazing. I never thought about it that way. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. Well, the thing about them, I mean, I think I said this a little bit before, is that they were able to pull off a lot of things that when other people do, it sound cheesy. You know what I mean? Like doing that super melodic, super musical thing with these like heavy breakdowns is like a really hard thing to do in a way that's not kind of corny, I think. And I think they all have such good taste. They're just like people with deep musical catalogs and intellect. And I feel like it really, like the way they kind of threaded them together is still kind of unmatched in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think there's like a grit to it, but also that musicianship you were alluding to earlier with like reading the magazines and really understanding music theory, along with the grit and like the real honest lyrics coming from Dustin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's inevitable that you're going to be like, okay, this stands out.
Well, I think one of I always feel like every like bands that really last and really make a lasting impact are bands where you could walk into a party and hear it on a radio across the room, right? And it's just like, oh, that's Thrice. Like, oh, that's Turnstile. Oh, that's, Coheed and Cambria. Like, they really did that. They were doing something that just did. It sounded like a lot of things, but it sounded like nothing you'd heard before. And I mean, they're just amazing people who are really fucking talented and love what they do. So, I mean, I just think that they're like really good friends and grew up together. It's so often that I see that, where these bands that are like really special have this bond well before the band ever existed sometimes, which is like really cool.
Well, at least on the surface, they seem like super articulate, like well-spoken, smart guys. And they've been the same lineup since the jump, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so when you come into that with that, not like a revolving door of, touring musicians and all that stuff, that must be different.
Well, it was different, and they're a special group of guys, and they fit in. I mean, the funny thing is, I feel like they just fit in so well with the bands that were already part of my little family. Like, just the nature of like they're just being good fucking down to earth guys. Like those guys are exactly the same now as the day I met them, when they would have drawn 5 people would be a good draw in Baltimore when we made this record.
Wow.
And they just still are down to earth, have nothing bad to say about anybody, nothing bad to say about other bands. They're not competitive. They're just inspired by things. And I mean, I can't say enough good things about them.
Well, you said something that was interesting earlier, which is that Island was, more or less hands off, which is probably not typical for a major. But I'm going to dial back the clocks to like, I don't know, April of 2003. I'm like a senior in high school. My older sister was friends with people that liked, that were into Thrice, and they had like an advanced copy of the All That's Left single.
Okay.
And the buzz was, what the buzz was?
What's that?
Thrice sold out. And so I listened to it and I'm like, this is Thrice on steroids. What are you talking about? Like, this is dialed Thrice. I guess the question is like, was there a clear single?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the only things that the label was super hands-on. I mean, they were hands-on with everything. And I don't mean to say they were like, they weren't like, okay, here's some money, go make a record. Like, they were involved. They were getting demos. They were coming to pre-production. They were coming to the record. They were involved, but they weren't like, oh, get rid of Brian and do this record with Howard Benson. Like, that was not, they weren't like, they wanted the band to make the record the band wanted to make. The interesting thing about All That's Left is I mean, in retrospect, I don't think that should have probably been the first single. It just was one of the first songs written for the record. And I think that main riff, when there weren't even vocals on anything, the guy from Island, that like, was just
it's all time. I love that riff.
It's like a stadium riff, So, I mean, I think time has proven out that maybe that is not like, like Stare at the Sun and Artists in the Ambulance and maybe, some other things are more of the hits off the record than the single was. But that was picked as a single well before some of those other songs were finished or written. So,
wow.
Like, the Artists in the Ambulance was not finished until like maybe 1 or 2 days left in the session.
Oh, wow.
Damn.
Yeah. So, I mean, that I think All That's Left was mixed and off to radio by the time the Artists in the Ambulance was ever finished.
And it makes sense if that song was written first and that it has the riff, especially around that time. If you think about it, I mean, radio is huge and it's what makes and breaks bands at that point, 2000, 2002, 2003, 2004, whatever. And now it's not like that, right? We just wouldn't have that world. Right. So you put out, most bands nowadays of their ilk get to put out whatever they want. That's what's going to be the single, if there's even going to be a single, or you get the whole record. So different world, but that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think the band, I mean, with some of that stuff, the band was just like, oh, easy with like whatever the label thought was fine. But then with the second single, there was drama. The second single was going to be The Artist in the Ambulance, and then K-Rock, from this is what my understanding, and it was a long time ago, but K-Rock came in at the last minute and was just like, we want the single to be Stare at the Sun. And then it was just like, oh fuck, or they're not going to play it or whatever. And I mean, I think time has proven out that Artists in the Ambulance is, their biggest song. I think had that been the next single of that record, may have taken on a whole nother life.
I absolutely love that song.
It's great. Do you know what that is titled after?
Please tell us. Okay.
It's there's a book called The Burn Collector that's written by this guy Al Burian, who was in Mile Marker. And when the guys were recording Illusion of Safety, my wife gave them a copy, and it's a collection of short stories, and one of them is called The Artist in the Ambulance.
Wow.
So you just blew the Thrice collective's minds right now, because they've been wondering for 20 years.
Yes.
It's like, was Dustin in an accident? What happened?
Right. Yeah.
No. It's actually a pretty incredible book. It's a very, I mean, I'm not surprised those guys like it. It's a really cool book. And then it was pretty cool actually, because I got married right after we finished The Artist in the Ambulance, and the Thrice guys were there, and Al, who wrote that story, was at the wedding too, and they all met. It was cool.
Wow, that's cool.
Damn.
Yeah,
that's some deep
time.
nerdery. That's some deep stuff right there.
And that's why we wanted you on. We wanted to hear that stuff.
Yeah, we couldn't have come up with that. We'd speculate till the cows come home.
I want to talk about that song while we're on it, just because there's a part, the part in between the verses and the choruses. Tepe's guitar sounds like a siren. Is that on purpose?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh, good pull, Tone. Good pull.
It took us a long time and that ended up being a wah-wah pedal that was like, something was like wrong with it, and we kept trying to move it and like play with it to get different sounds, and it just was sat in this one position that made everything these weird frequencies, and yeah, it was really cool.
Well, it had the effect that you wanted, because it definitely sounded like that, and I thought to myself, while listening to it the other night, this is what this sounds like. I have to ask. I need to know this.
Yes.
Well, the beginning of Paper Tigers, there's a siren. What is that noise?
That's just like a bunch of weird guitar pedals, like reverse feedbacks and things like that.
Was that the intent with that too, or?
I don't remember.
Come on, it was funny. It was 20 years ago.
Let's say yes, so it sounds like much more deliberate than anything ever probably was.
Happy magic. I love it. Man, so many like hot takes in just the last two questions there. You said that the label had chosen that single, so I want to just dial it back here for a second. Was that a pivot? Like, did they come to the table with like books of songs? I know these guys are pretty intricate in terms of delivering material. Did they make a hard pivot? Like, okay, that looks like it's going to work. Let's go that route.
No, I don't think so. I think that they were pretty like not in just writing songs they were excited about, and they kind of came out as there wasn't a lot of like, what should this be? How do we transition? Yeah. Like, how do we cross over and get big? I mean, I don't remember a conversation like that ever happening one time with anybody involved. Like, they were just like, they were writing that. I think that was more of a kind of like, I've never had a conversation with them, but I thought that was kind of a more like Refused kind of inspired, kind of like you could hear the cheering over it.
Yeah.
And actually, a fun fact with that song is the end of the chorus ends with "We are the dead." He says that.
Yeah.
Originally, I remember sitting at Dustin's house, like I was over there, and he was sitting up with an acoustic guitar trying to come up with melodies for the chorus. And at first it wasn't a ghost, that's all that's left, whatever. He just was going, "We are the dead, we are the dead, we are the dead, we are the dead." And over and over and over again. And then there was definitely a like, that's pretty fucking cool, but it should probably not be that. But the funny thing is, it would have been pretty massive if it had been that, yeah, just in terms of memorability. But yeah, I don't think I don't know that I have seen them play that song in 15 years. So
yeah,
I don't know that that's like a Thrice inner band favorite.
We saw it in Portland in 2003, spring of 2003, Anthony.
Yeah, with the Used,
Mike they opened for the Used, yeah.
And Mike Chem before they
what a
took
fucking
over the
bill
planet.
that was at a 2,000 cap arena or club. But yeah, they must have just started touring for this. So,
I mean, I'm sure up until Vihisu, they probably were always playing that song. But yeah. I would imagine that next year is the 20-year anniversary of this, that they'll do a tour and they'll play that. It'll be interesting.
It'll be back in the rotation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because, I mean, we loved it in 2003. We loved it 10 years ago. We loved it 5 years. We love it now. Like I could possibly enjoy this record more now than I did when I was a kid. So I got to know.
That's so cool.
When you're creating it, are you like, holy shit, man, we got something special?
Yeah, it did feel that way. I mean, it doesn't always feel that way, but I mean, it was like a time and place where it just like we had great synergy. I felt like I was experienced enough to kind of lead things, but also like young enough and like connected on a personal level with the guys enough to like that they felt comfortable being themselves. And they were just doing something that was just so special. Like it just felt special. Like, it's like any one of the components about the band that is special, like the musicality. Okay. The lyrics, the stylistic, all of the melting pot of influences, like any one of those things in and of itself would draw me to a band. And when you put it all together, that's when you're like, wow, this is, this felt important, and it was important,
Oh, it was definitely important because this era went on for a few years and it spawned a lot of knockoffs that were not nearly as talented and able to do what they are able to do.
But I mean, the cool thing about Thrice is it's, I think that they also inspired a lot of bands to get weirder too. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like, oh, they inspired this like melodic metal. Like, I think they also became the blueprint of like, hey, we can get weird and we can make music that we're really passionate about, even if it isn't what's like happening now, or it's not going to be mainstream, and still be really successful on your own terms,
Does anyone come to mind? I'm curious.
Besides Thrice?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Radiohead, Cave-In.
Cave-In, no doubt. Yeah.
I mean, so many bands. I mean, Fugazi.
Well, those are the ones that you end up remembering, right? The ones that don't just fall into the cookie cutter of the time stuff. They make the of the time stuff. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think Turnstile is doing that now. I mean, I don't know if you guys are fans, but they're just like, they've taken a whole bunch of things that people love and people have combined for a long time and doing it in a way that feels like you've never heard it before. And they're also amazing people that treat people well, that grew up together, that respect one another, respect their fans, love their fans. I mean, doing it for all the right reasons, It's the thing that makes you feel good about buying records and t-shirts and spending your life doing podcasts and touring and doing all of it,
Hell yeah, dude. That's exactly it. Yep.
It's incredible too, because the whole time, music is always evolving. So you're really kind of like you're jumping on this train that's already moving, like in terms of music style and genre. So that's why I was kind of, asking those questions specifically. Was the band pivoting? But no, they were just rolling. And like, if it fits, it fits. Right. If it doesn't, whatever, I
mean, it was not contrived in any way. Those guys would not be capable of that. You know what I mean? They're just like the most real people you could meet. And there's just like, I think even asking them to be anything but themselves is, I mean, it just would never happen. It's like, I don't think they're capable of, they're just very authentic.
Well, I love that. Like with Island, it was them on steroids, but they kept you know what I mean? Like what helped them get there. And I remember even like the packaging there was no compromise there either. Like each song had its own card. It was just them, but amplified, which you never get that.
I'll tell you a funny thing about that record that I don't think I've ever even said to them, but like one of the reasons I stopped doing interviews and I never wanted to do interviews and don't even like sometimes doing this stuff is I remember I got asked to do everybody on the first edition of that record, everybody did like notes about the songs. So like it's like everybody commenting. And I just remember getting the record and reading it and thinking, God damn, I sound like I'm taking credit for things that I have no fucking business taking credit for. And I'm never going to do this ever again, because it's a really hard thing to talk about, as a producer. It's like, yeah, you're there, you're clearly a part of it, but it's always the band. You know what I mean? Like if it was me that made the Artist in the Ambulance all by myself, I would have done it a fucking million times, which you're not going to do
it earlier,
Right. I mean, so it's a weird thing because you are a big part of it, but clearly the band has gone on without me to have one of the most fabulous, successful careers you could imagine. Doesn't mean I wasn't a big part of it. It doesn't mean I'm not a part of the story. Just means that at the end of the day, it's got to always be about the band. And it took me a long time to it was only really when I started doing Be Well interviews and people started asking me about records in that context, I felt a little more comfortable talking about it. So,
well, hey, we came to you with this, so yeah, it wasn't like you hit us up. I want to chat Thrice.
Right. Well, and in listening to you talk about it, we've been doing this now for a while. We've talked to a lot of different artists, some producers, but they produce their own stuff. So like they aren't in that, like, I'm not in the band, but I'm kind of there. And so being able to do that and actually talk about these things is difficult from your perspective, I would imagine, because you don't want to sound like you're taking credit for something that maybe you didn't necessarily feel. I don't know. It's tough. Like I wouldn't want to do that either. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, I think my role in the records I've been involved with has been important, but never as important as the artist, like, period. You know what I mean? Like, my job is to bring out the best in the artists. At the end of the day, it's always about them. And it's just the only thing that's funny about it is that because we're talking about the Artist in the Ambulances, I was horrified when I read what I wrote because I felt like, God, I am putting an importance on me that is like just doesn't feel good to me. But I mean, I don't think it was like obnoxious, but it was just kind of one of those things where I kind of was like, oh wow, reading it back.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of reading it back, did you? Because I know like all those, like us as a podcast, we're always looking at like people leave reviews on Apple and Spotify, whatever. We check them out. Are you like looking to see what people think? And maybe there's a broad question for your catalog. Like after it comes out, are you tuned into the response?
I'm not tuned into the response, but I will say it's when you see super negative things, it is hurtful. I mean,
I can imagine.
I hate seeing super negative things about any artist's work, really, to be honest, only because, like, whether I'm involved in it or not, only because I think that people don't understand sometimes like how hard making records and the things that artists give up in their lives to make records. And I think it's pretty easy in some Instagram comment or tweet or whatever to just be cruel and not really like you most of the time, like what you're saying about like, oh, the word was those guys sold out. Like nobody knows shit about what actually happened. It's like doesn't
right.
Exactly. And they're 16 years old too.
And they're 16 and so imagine that amplified by like 20 million now, where everybody's opinion can just be fucking everywhere. I just think at the end of the day, it's so rare that you'll read a comment or even a negative review that really contributes to like a meaningful dialogue or has anything that it's like sometimes records are bad, but there's a way that you can talk about that isn't mean and cruel. And that's why I just try and stay away from the comments, and I also know firsthand that most of the times when bands make bad records or whatever, they're already feel awful about it. And just seeing people pile on just can be, but and then the flip side is sometimes bands get all these good reviews and then it kind of affects the way they write. And I think that's like a real thing with, like, I think often bands' second records are not as good. The sophomore slump is like real because you're either overly affected by the negative things you read or by even the positive things you read. So
totally. Wow.
My personal, like, there was a time in my career when I started to beat myself up about like, oh, that record should have sold more, or like, wouldn't, like, I thought that was going to be bigger. And one day I just said, like, you know what? This not that what does that do for anybody? Like, the only thing that I can control is giving everything I have to every project I'm involved in. Outside of that, nothing matters. And if like I get to a point where that isn't enough anymore and the records aren't good anymore and I don't feel good about them, then I'll stop doing the records. But like trying to make like record sales or people's reaction kind of the driving force behind the record making is always a fucking bad idea. Like it's all you can do is, given the set of circumstances you have in front of you, the people, the song ideas, the environment, everything, is do everything you can to make it as the best it possibly can be. And then you cross your fingers. So if you do all that and then you get some snarky asshole being like, these fucking guys sold out, and like, oh man, McTernan's just looking for a paycheck here, or whatever.
He's cashing the bag, getting the bag.
Yeah. I mean, it's not productive. And if I paid attention, like I do everything I can to not pay attention. And then sometimes you see that stuff and you're just like, you know what, fuck you, man.
Yeah. Words to live by, but also understandable to have feelings about things like that, for sure.
A lot of what you said kind of confirms the thoughts that I've had over the last 20 years, which is like, yeah, they signed to Island, but it was kind of a no compromise album, And like, I remember seeing them in the fall of 2003 tour on this in Lupo's in Providence. And then
love Lupo's.
Yeah, Lupo's and then the Avalon. They brought Boys in the Well. Right. Verse opened the Lupo show. Like that doesn't happen for major label bands. Like they were in tune with it. And everything you've said for the last hour confirms that. Yeah.
And to be honest, me getting kind of moving out of the picture was not the label, it was the band. And it wasn't a negative thing. I mean, it was basically like this is a hot take on the Thrice thing, but I personally believe I loved the direction we were going from the illusion of safety to artist. And I had this vision of what the follow-up to artist was going to be that, like, in my mind, if we had made the record I had in my mind, I think would have been massive. The interesting thing is, I think in some ways, the best thing that ever happened for Thrice as people and as artists is having Vihisu not be massive, because that opened them up to be able to go down a much more creative path that I don't think like the Finches and the Used and all these other bands that got on the hamster wheel of like getting big, they never went down that road. And I think if Thrice had gone, like even more mainstream and even hookier and had some like smash radio single, I would be surprised if they would still be a band now.
That's fascinating.
So firing me is the best thing you can do.
Well, that leads me to my question about what you just said there. Is that record still something that could be done today? The one that you think that could have come out after Artist?
No, I'm glad that record didn't happen, to be honest with you, because I think that I just love what they did. Like, they just like the same thing that made them an exciting band to me. Them saying, hey, the safe thing is to keep working with you, Brian, but we're going to go in a completely different direction. fits so perfectly with everything that I love about them. So as hard as that is to hear, from a band that you feel like you're the fifth member of, it's also what makes them such a special band. And the fact that can all happen and we're all still so close and have such like deep admiration and love for one another, I think it's a testament to like everything we've talked about them as people leading up to now.
Nate, if you don't go to that show, you're kicked off the podcast, man.
Oh man, it's been it's been in the calendar forever. So
you gotta go. You gotta go, man. We don't get those in Portland, man. You gotta go.
I'll go, Brian. I'll buy you a shot. Let's go. Let's do it.
Hit me up.
Man, everything you just said, especially that last little part, like it just makes me think of like the movie industry. Like when it becomes predictable, it gets boring, gets stale, and then it's just a repeat of a repeat. But when artists or directors, like call it Fincher for that matter, that artistic freedom to just do something completely against the grain is what keeps people engaged. And it may not be a commercial success a la Fight Club, but it's a cult classic forever. And the fans, deep fans, the real fans, will always subscribe to that because it's something that's so unique and it's not a natural progression. So I think to highlight what you're saying, and that's exactly what the band is doing today.
Yeah. And I mean, they keep making really important music, which is just hard to do for this long. Really is. Doesn't get easier, it gets harder,
Right. Yeah. So circling back to you, do you feel this record opened some doors for you?
It did. Yeah, for sure. I mean, in a lot of ways, about like the illusion of safety, like kind of changed my life in a lot of ways, because it went from like Thrice is the first band that is not part of my internal web to like every band I was working with was outside of my internal web in a lot of ways. And some, I think that like them trusting me to make the record and then the record coming out as well as it did, I think to a lot of bands went, oh, because I was young. So, I mean, it wasn't like, oh, at that point, people hadn't been seeing my name for 20 some years. If like you saw my name on a record like that now, it would be like, oh, that totally makes sense. But I think it proved a lot to some people that like maybe what I was doing was not just, a fluke, and also kind of was like, oh, like you can get bigger and have a budget and not have to, stop working with Brian. Because at that point, there were several bands that I had been involved with that were getting signed to major labels and all that. And a lot of the other ones went and made records with other people. And I think Thrice kind of, then people are like, oh, this is a thing you can do, have money and spend it on Brian.
Was this the like biggest commercial success?
No, I think that the Census Fail Still Searching record has sold
really
more. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I would never have thought that.
Yeah. Believe it or not, it's Still Searching is gold. Artists in the Ambulance either is or is very close, but Still Searching also has a gold single.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, both big records, the two of the biggest records I've been involved in.
Who were they on at that point?
They were on Vagrant.
Vagrant, that's right. Wow, that was a huge record for them then. Holy shit.
Yeah, it was a big record. And that was a funny record because that was a record that was like, I didn't know those guys really. I had no relationship with them and they were big band. So it was like, it was like they could have gone to anybody kind of situation and wanted to go with me, which was cool.
So many questions that don't fit the theme of this podcast, this episode.
Right? Yeah, we could go off on that stuff.
I think we're subscribing you to like a 3-episode deal.
Yeah, that's fine. Anytime.
We're the major label coming in.
I wish. No, we're the indie guy.
We're the indie guy trying to figure shit out.
Yeah.
3 with the option for 6 more. Yeah.
All right, so Brian, looking back on this record, what is 1 or 2 things that you're most proud of?
Kind of all of it, in the sense that I felt like I just helped shepherd them through their own process. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the record is so them, and I feel like I do feel proud that I was the right person at the right time. Like they took a chance and believed in me, and I held up my, I earned that trust, which maybe wasn't that well deserved going into it.
It's funny. You mentioned that you had this vision for an artist follow-up. So that was like maybe your vision of like the next chapter of Thrice. Was there anything as you look back that you would change about artists?
Yes. I think that if I'm being completely honest, I feel like I'm super, super proud of everything I did with them in terms of like pre-production and arrangement and kind of shepherding and kind of protecting them a little bit from label pressure, but like, pushing them along and, all of those things. I feel like 100%. I feel like there are some risks that maybe in the actual recording that I would take now that maybe I was a little too young to take then. I think that if I had any regret, I was trying to be professional, in the recording part, where I think that if it wasn't Thrice and this big budget and whatever, I might have got a little more wild. You know what I mean?
Wild and crazy. The only thing that comes to mind, and we were chatting about this the other night, is, and this isn't a reflection of you, it's probably the band's choice, but I would have ended the album with Abolition of Man.
Yep.
I would have ended that. That is a perfect closer. And like, I almost forgot there was another song after that, to be honest.
Yeah. What does it end with? Hoods on Peregrine?
Don't tell him we won't ask.
Yeah. I don't even know what song that is because I don't ever know the real song titles. Someone is going to sing it for me.
You don't want me singing that.
Don't tell him we won't ask you. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Ice Town. Yeah. Right in key and everything.
Yeah, no, I don't know about that, but no shit. That song's awesome too. But I think the way that the Abolition of Man goes with the breakdown and it's would have been great to finish the record, but that's just a fan's perspective from 20 years of listening to it. And,
what I love? That you care about the sequence.
Yeah, I fucking love that shit. Yeah.
Hey, do you know who we are? No.
No, he doesn't. No.
He has no fucking clue.
Brian, one more on just a kind of like rewind, like personal perspective. Because for us, we have like, very vivid memories of first listening to the album over the years, kind of connotation memories. But for you were there, like writing sessions, like you said, a really strong relationship with the band. Listening to the record now, is there just real time capsule moments that come to mind spinning this record?
Yes, I honestly can remember. I mean, this was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, not just like professionally, but like, I mean, I love these guys. Like to sum up, like I was just when I was in Anaheim with Be Well, I got some like really awful news that morning about my mom, and Eddie came to the club and we went and had lunch, and it was like just being with him and just the history we have, like it was just like a warm blanket in a fucking blizzard, and so for me this record is, I mean, I'm proud of it. I feel like I've proved a lot to myself, and I mean I could just I remember which rehearsal rooms we were in for almost every song that was written. I remember like having breakfast with Dustin before we went back to the studio and they wrote Silhouette. I mean, it's so vivid for me, like everything, the whole experience and like the whole process, because I had never spent that long on a record before. I'd never done a major label record. I had never flown out and spent weeks and weeks on the West Coast with a band in their rehearsal space. It was just a lot of firsts. And I mean, it's so cool to like put that kind of energy into something and have people still care about it.
And they do. I mean, like we said, we've been listening to it now for 20 years, and I don't ever get tired of it.
No, I don't.
It's just so good, and you find new pieces every time you listen to it because it's got some complexities and all that stuff, but it's fucking great, man. And we really appreciate talking with you about it and getting your firsthand account of being there.
Yeah, man, this has been great. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Brian is not only the producer extraordinaire that we've all talked about for the last hour, He's a front man for, I'm going to call it supergroup. I don't know how you feel about that term. Be Well. Great EP that dropped last year.
I call
Go
it
check it out.
Midlife Crisis band.
Well, hey, I mean, I'll be real. If you like Thrice, you'll like Be Well. Go check them out.
That's very cool.
Well, thank you, Brian. We really appreciate talking with you.
Yeah, man. Anytime. I'm happy to. It's clear. I love talking about this stuff, and you guys are great. So
thanks. Thank you for listening to Podio Slave. We are at Podio Slave on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the places that you can find us on social media. Facebook, Podio Slave Podcast. YouTube, Podio Slave Podcast there. Email us at podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. And hey, if you want to become a supporter, click on the link at the bottom of the episode and give us $1, give us $5. It keeps the lights on, keeps us going. We really appreciate that stuff. Thank you. You can swear, you don't have to, but you can.
Let it rip. Let it rip, Brian.
Fuck.
Perfect. Yes, I'm saving that.